to Episode 6 of Fixing America with J. Mill. We have discussed that our democracy was broken from its beginning, but has survived because it was founded on solid tenets and expressly recognized at its inception an ultimate goal to create a more perfect union consistent with its Declaration of Independence. Our American experiments began in violation of its own declared standards to win the support of the prevailing inherited culture of that time that only white property owners could participate in civic affairs. America's story began when our settlers revolted against the form of government Great Britain imposed upon them. They wanted a voice in their government, not to be subservient to a king. They wanted something different. They wanted a government ruled by its citizens. Our history does not typically describe the Revolutionary War as a war over the form of government. Rather, it is described as our war for independence. But that is exactly what it was, a war to replace monarchy with democracy. And, unfortunately, we as a nation have underestimated the importance of understanding what that means and how knowledge of it can help us today to make better governance choices. So let us begin by reviewing history to understand why knowledge of forms of government is important and how our lack of such knowledge has contributed to our loss of commitment to our democratic form of government. Now, how do we know form of government is important? Obviously, as stated before, it was worth fighting a bloody war for by our ancestors. But in fairness, the causes of war are usually complex and involve political systems, ideologies, government structures, and overlap with economic, religious, ethnic, and territorial disputes. But the wars listed below are generally considered to have been fought primarily over the form of government. The first group is Revolutionary Wars. The Revolutionary War was fought from 1775 to 1783 because the colonists rejected the British monarchy in favor of a republic form of self-governance. The French Revolution was fought from 1789 to 1799 when the people overthrew King Louis XVI and his reign of terror, monarchy, in favor of a republic form of government, which later adopted democratic principles that ended with the rise of Napoleon Bonaparte, an autocrat. Next was the Russian Revolution and Civil War, which was fought from 1917 to 1923. It was a conflict between the Bolsheviks seeking a communist state and forces defending monarchy, liberal democracy, and other alternatives. And next was the Spanish Civil War, which was fought from 1936 to 1939. In that war, the Republicans supported the Republic, which favored democracy, and the Nationalists, led by Francisco Franco, wanted authoritarian rule, which ultimately prevailed and resulted in a brutal dictatorship lasting from 1936 until his death in 1975. The second group is international wars. So we'll start with World War II, which was fought from 1939 to 1945. Now, while not purely about forms of government, much of it pitted fascist authoritarian regimes such as Nazi Germany, fascist Italy, and the Imperial Japan against democracies and communists. The United States, United Kingdom, Australia, Canada, Poland, France, Russia, and some others who opposed that system of rule. And next was the Cold War, which was waged from 1947 to 1991. It was a global geopolitical struggle centered on the clash between liberal democracy/capitalism, involving the United States and its allies, and communism, sought by the Soviet Union and its allies. While it rarely meant direct U.S.-USSR combat, proxy wars like Korea, Vietnam, and Afghanistan were fought over the form of government being imposed upon other countries. Now, why is the form of government worth fighting over? Well, the answer is simple. The form of governance determines who has power and how they use it. History is replete with examples of brutality, dehumanization, and repression caused by vesting too much power in one person or one small group of people. As the maxim states, if power corrupts, absolute power corrupts absolutely. Simply stated, the form of government will affect you. It determines your freedoms, your rights, and your safety. Think about it. Now, today, Trump has recently threatened to erase the Iranian people from the face of the earth. He has made the same type of threats against certain groups of people within America. His attacks and efforts to seek retribution against those who oppose him are explicit and nauseously frequent. Our form of government is at the core of our fight for continued freedom and prosperity. Why is knowledge of the different forms of government important? Well, let's begin with the commonly expressed sentiment. I'm sick of politics. It don't do no good to vote. My representatives don't really care about me. They want to help people who help them stay in power. Their goal is just to stay in power. They love having power and acting like big shots. The prevailing view of most Americans towards politics today is one of skepticism and fatigue, distrust of government and politicians, and divisiveness. It is stressful and exhausting. Apathy and helplessness are common. Feeling hopeless, many citizens are resigned to simply support anyone who makes bold statements and promises to dramatically end political infighting in favor of a powerful ruler with the power, audacity, and strength to buck the system to get things done. They find a governance system without politics appealing, and they are willing to overlook or ignore as political rhetoric political promises that should send alarm bells warning of authoritarian rule. And therein lies the problem. Non-democratic forms of government do not generally involve broad citizen political activity. Why? Because the king rules and makes the decisions for his subjects. He, the king, does not ask you, the citizen. He makes decisions for you. So you do not have to worry about politics. In fact, your right to protest his decisions is typically curtailed or even eliminated. To get rid of the distasteful politics of governance, you generally must forfeit your rights to have a voice in it. In essence, you are being asked to cut off your nose to spite your face. While politics is messy, it is necessary in a democracy. My plan is to figure out how to minimize its negative effects. That is, how to subordinate politics to the governance function. Finding the correct balance will be challenging. In recent times in America, the politicians have promised to enshrine old-fashioned, trusted American values, customs, heritage, and social order into our government. They make it sound safe and comforting. But as we are experiencing, and as will be explored in future episodes, those features come at the expense of major democratic tenets of our liberal democracy: liberty, equality, justice, secularism, rule of law, individual rights, independent judiciary, and co-equal branches of government. as we have witnessed. When you subordinate liberty, equality, and the rule of law to customs, heritage, and social order, you severely weaken or destroy the basic tenets of our liberal democracy. What our citizens are not told is that structural changes to our government were required to effect such results. Citizens were reassured that such changes would be putting America first, cutting red tape, and eliminating waste and fraud. In truth, those changes were giving the executive branch, that is the president, unprecedented powers, eliminating oversight, and subordinating the legislative and judicial branches of government to the executive branch. What politicians were really promoting was, and is, to change the form of government from a liberal democracy to an autocracy, a dictatorship, or an oligarchy. In proof of that fact, consider the DOJ's repeated arguments before courts throughout this nation that the president can ignore laws, abuse individual guaranteed rights, and restrict individual freedoms to assure implementation and compliance with his agenda. In other words, their system insists that the president can unilaterally dictate the laws governing our country, and we are prohibited from criticizing it. We can conclude that if citizens are not knowledgeable about the different forms of government, they may not recognize the dramatic mistake they are making and regret it later. They may assume they will have a voice even when an authoritarian form of government is proposed based upon the assertion that you, Mr. Citizen, will no longer be burdened with the decisions related to governance. The form of governments generally can be discussed in three categories. The first category is A, the structure measured by political authority. It is based on how power is organized and exercised in a state. This classification answers who rules and how the authority is structured. Some of these types of governments are a totalitarian, where a single leader or party holds all power; a theocracy, where religious leaders rule in the name of God or a deity; a plutocracy, where wealthy individuals or groups use wealth to control; a dictatorship, where one person holds absolute power and suppresses dissent. A monarchy is ruled by a king or queen, and there are several different kinds. An autocracy has one ruler who has absolute power. An authoritarian regime is ruled by one person or small group of people. An oligarchy is ruled by a small group of elites, generally wealthy. A democracy is ruled by the people, often through elections. An anarchy has an absence of government. Now, the second category is based on the political ideology. It is based on the ideas about how society and government should work. These are sets of beliefs or doctrines that inspire movements or systems. This classification answers what values or goals should guide the government and society. And these are fascism, based on authoritarian and ultra-nationalist ideology, glorification of the state, centralized power, and suppression of dissent. Socialism, an ideology advocating collective or state ownership of major industries and resources to reduce inequality. Communism, a radical form of socialism that seeks a classless, stateless society where all property is commonly owned. Democracy, majority rule with liberal principles of individual rights, constitutionalism, and checks on power. And last, anarchy, a preference to no formal government or authority. Leo Tolstoy was a Christian anarchist and the famous Russian author of War and Peace, who profoundly influenced Mahatma Gandhi and Martin Luther King Jr. The third category is economic systems. It is based on how resources and wealth are produced and distributed. These describe the organization of the economy. This classification answers who owns the resources and how wealth is distributed. And there are 5 major categories. Capitalism. This system provides a private ownership of the means of production with profit-driven markets. Socialism. This system provides for collective/public ownership of key industry but demands the redistribution of wealth. Communism. As an economy, this system abolishes private property entirely and is based upon the philosophy from each according to ability to each according to need. Feudalism. This system was prevalent in medieval Europe. A king or great lord would grant land to lesser lords, who in turn would grant smaller portions to other lords or peasants, who would then be bound to the land. Mercantilism. This is an economic system designed to maximize exports and minimize imports to accumulate resources within the country and use those resources for one-sided trade. The foregoing categorization is a simplification. The terms can be confusing. For example, capitalism and socialism are not always described as forms of government. Technically, the same is true of communism. Capitalism, socialism, and communism may be more accurately described as economic systems used by governments. My way of minimizing confusion is to think about forms of government by ranking them by the leader's power. My ranking goes from most powerful to least. That does not mean the first 5 or 6 could not wield absolute or near absolute power. Number 1, totalitarianism. This is where the leader controls everything: politics, economy, media, culture, even private life. He or she has no limits on authority. Example, Stalin's USSR, North Korea under the Kim dynasty. Trump's recent comments about governing Venezuela or Iran and his war against wokeness are prime examples of this type of governance philosophy. Number 2, dictatorship/autocracy. Again, this is where one person holds absolute authority, usually maintained by force or fear. Not always as deeply controlling as totalitarianism, but still unchecked. Example, Augusto Pinochet's Chile and Idi Amin's Uganda. Number 3, communism, real-world regimes. This involves a centralized authority in a single party, like a political party, and often a single leader: Lenin, Stalin, Mao, Castro. Examples, the USSR, Mao's China, Cuba, and North Korea. Number 4, absolute monarchy. This typically involves a hereditary ruler, a king, queen, or emperor, with near total control. The ruler's power is often justified by divine right. For example, Louis XIV of France, who said, "I am the state," or modern Saudi Arabia to an extent. Number 5, a military junta. Here, power rests in a group of generals. Authority is strong, but divided among top military officials, so the leader may not be an absolute as a dictator. Example, Myanmar in Burma, past regimes in Latin America, or General Francisco Franco of Spain. Number 6, oligarchy. This is ruled by a small group of elites that is, wealthy families, nobility, corporations, military officers, etc., where the individual leaders usually don't have as much unchecked power as in a dictatorship. Instead, power is shared among the elite circle. An example would be ancient Sparta, the rule of the warrior elite, or modern Russia is often described as having oligarchic features. A plutocracy is a close cousin to an oligarchy. Theocracy, number 7. In this form of government, the leaders rule in the name of a religion or are seen as divinely guided. Power can be immense, but is tied to religious authority and clerical structures. An example, Iran, the supreme leader has more power than the elected president. Number 8, one-party state. This type of power rests with a ruling party, generally political, where the leader is powerful but depends on party structure. For example, China. The CCP's general secretary holds great power, but it is tied to party consensus. Number 9, authoritarian socialism. This type involves an economic system where the state or society owns major industries with the leaders and the state controlling both the economy and the politics. An example would be Venezuela under Chavez or Maduro. Number 10, a constitutional monarchy. Here a monarch exists, but is mostly symbolic. The real power lies with elected officials. The monarch's direct authority is minimal. Example, the United Kingdom, Japan, and Sweden. Number 11, representative democracy/republic. In this type, leaders are elected and limited by constitutions, laws, checks, and balances. Power is shared with legislatures, courts, and voters. Example, United States, Germany, and India. Number 12, democratic socialism. This is a mixed economy system where the state or society owns or controls major industries. But politics can be democratic. Leaders are elected and power is limited, such as a modern Scandinavia. Number 13, direct democracy. In this type, leaders have the least individual power since citizens directly decide on laws and policies. Leaders act more as facilitators than rulers. Example, ancient Athens and modern Swiss referendums. And number 14, communism, Marxist theoretical communism. This is a stateless, classless society where the people collectively own resources. There is no leader. One final observation. Distrust in government is inherently tied to politics. As Callie McQuilkin wrote in We Confuse Politics with Government, They're Not the Same, published by ILR Buffalo CoLab at Cornell University on August 4th, 2021. Governance can and should be above politics. We as Americans should be able to sit across the table and civilly discuss forms of government with our fellow citizens, whether they are Republican, Democrats, Independents, Libertarians, Mexicans, African Americans, gay, straight, rich, poor, young, old, pretty, or ugly. A discussion about forms of governance is not a political subject. It is a subject that should be introduced into our national discourse. This episode contains a lot of valuable information. Feel free to view a written newsletter version of it on Substack under my Fixing America with J-Mill publication banner. Thanks for listening. Please do not forget to like, share, subscribe, leave a comment or note, or start a chat. See you next episode. Take care and resist. J-Mill.